we have a tremendous opportunity as adults to support children around behaviour. We talk about something we call the cycle of influence.
In my first year as a teacher, many years ago, I heard Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former head of Ofsted. He was my head teacher back then. And he done a briefing and it stuck with me what he said. He said, kids will be kids will be kids. And you're the adults. And he said, you've got to recognize the behavior and try to find a way of managing it. Today I'm here with Jonathan Newport, Global Director and Chief Learning Officer at Team Teach, a leading provider of behavior support, training over 100,000 people globally each year. Jonathan's a behavior specialist and he has trained teachers all over the world on how to understand and support student behavior. Jonathan, can I ask you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you do?
Aslam, it's great to be with you today. Yeah, as you've said, I work with behaviour. We train over 100,000 people every year, but my background is in education. I started out as a primary school teacher many, many years ago. So over 35 years experience in education. I started off in mainstream schools in England and then worked for Barnardo's, which is the largest children's charity here in the UK. I worked at their flagship residential special school for over 17 years, and that's really where my interest peaked in behaviour and understanding how behaviour is communication, and children, young people, adults, we're all communicating all the time through our behaviours, and how we understand that and how we best support those children and young people who really need us to understand as they struggle to make sense of the world they find themselves in. How do we best support them?
I really like that idea of young people trying to understand the world that they find themselves in. Because I was talking with another colleague of mine recently about how, as adults right now in 2024, we feel so much anxiety with things that are going on around the world, the things you see on the news, the rising cost of living, all these sorts of things. Now imagine what it's like for a young person to try and navigate that world.
Yeah, and just think, you think absolutely recent times. We think about COVID and the global pandemic that we had, and children look to adults for reassurance. At times of crisis in their lives, they look to adults. And we went through a time where, as adults, we didn't understand what was going on. We didn't know, what it was for ourselves. So for children, it must have been a real source of angst and anxiety in trying to navigate that world, just that moment in time that we found ourselves going through. Must have been really difficult, but that for them is happening all the time. And I think if you think that we now live in a world where there's so much communication going on, so much access through the media to world events and things that are happening, climate change, all those things impact on children. They hear all those things all the time. And trying to understand and unpick what's going on in the world is quite, it's a challenge for adults. So for children, even more complicated.
I found in my role I've been teaching since 2004 really, and in all those years I found that young people always use their behavior as a form of communication. They're trying to say something, whether it's acting up in class because the work's a bit too hard, or they're not getting the attention that other favourites of staff members might be receiving, or a plethora of reasons. And I wanted to ask you, in my first year as a teacher, many years ago, I heard Sir Michael Wilshaw, the former head of Ofsted. He was my head teacher back then. And he done a briefing and it stuck with me what he said. He said, kids will be kids will be kids. And you're the adults. And he said, you've got to recognize the behavior and try to find a way of managing it. And that idea of kids will be kids really stuck with me because the times have changed. The times are the one thing that are always changing. But in your role as a, I have more questions, but I wanted to ask you: have you found as a behavior specialist that children around the world have similarities in terms of their behavior, but also were there any differences that you found?
Yeah, I mean that's a massive question, and probably we could talk about it for a long, long time. I think children are, in terms of development, children develop in similar ways, but then you've got all the things that impact on them in terms of nurture, in terms of their cultures, in terms of cultural expectations. in terms of the things that are going on around them, aspirations of their parents, of families. There's so much that impacts on children that causes children to respond in different ways. And I think that's the thing that we try and look at is if you go on the premise of understanding that behavior is communication, then our role as adults in supporting the children, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, supporting rather than managing, so we're supporting the children is to just help them, you know, actually understand what they're trying to communicate here. As you said, you've got children who will behave in a certain way, and it's simply, I want some attention, I'm stuck on the piece of work I'm on. But sometimes those behaviors are actually expressing far deeper things that are going on that they need support with. And then there are other things that impact on them in terms of diagnosis and how that affects the emotions that are going on inside them. So it's a complicated piece. It's not as simple as here are the five rules you must follow as an adult, as a teacher, and that will always work. You've just got to, you've got to be thinking all the time and thinking differently for each individual.
And I had one of my first podcasts was with Dr. Martin Bloomfield, and he says, with children who have special needs, such as dyslexic students, they come into school with an incredible amount of anxiety, and that's an anxiety they carry into the subjects, and that anxiety increases with the subjects that they really struggle in. And there's learned helplessness, where they continue to be told, well, you haven't done very well here, until they decide, well, I guess I'm not good at this.
Yeah, and I think absolutely, if you look at all of the different things that children are bringing in all the time and the layers that they're bringing in of emotions that they have from the relationships they have at home, with parents, with siblings, you then think about those diagnoses that add an extra layer. The fact that we're living in a world where we understand so much more about the brain and how we all work and the joy of neurodiversity and the fact that we're all kind of driven and prompted in different ways through our brains. And there's so much for us to understand, and as adults there's so much for us to understand, but then our role in supporting children understanding, it's completely, so your example, it's completely understandable if you're coming in as a child with dyslexia, you're coming in and you're anxious about certain lessons. Makes really good sense. So what's our role as an adult is to support and reduce that level of anxiety, not to say, no, 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 you shouldn't have any anxiety. It's how do you support them and give them the mechanics to them that, then they're in a place where they're regulating their behavior. You're supporting them in doing that.
And I think that to take you back to your point about COVID, it was a very difficult time for us. But one of the positive outcomes is that as educationalists, we put a focus on well-being and on finding out, because what ways we can, as the educators, support young people, because it was a time when we all had to find ways of managing our emotions, and the situation was unprecedented, and what was it like for young people, as you mentioned. And so I think this conversation we're having is very timely as well, with we're now in the second or third year of focusing on well-being. And I think, and I hope that the strategies that we can give our listeners today will really help teachers to just start to consider and reconsider how they can best support. Because like you said, the idea of support is very important. I think there's a huge argument for teachers to find ways of training themselves up as mentors and as coaches, because being the subject specialist right now is not enough. It's not what the young people need in the world that we currently live in. It might have been what they needed in the 1980s and 1990s, but now the world is such a incredibly diverse and ever-changing thing that we need to be more than just a subject specialist. And I think part of that is listening to hopefully the advice that we can give our listeners today.
Well, I think if just your point there about the fact that we've focused on well-being, certainly in the UK, an organisation over here called Teacher Tap did some surveys about behaviour, and it was found that immediately after COVID and schools reopened and the focus was on nurture and well-being, and behaviour was at the best, in terms of teachers and their surveys, they were saying it's the best we've ever seen. But the moment we move that focus away, and that's not our primary focus. And systems are built to to encourage academic achievement. I completely understand that, but if you don't get the balance right, then that's where behavior shifts.
Thank you, Jonathan. So I want to start with our, because otherwise we could be here with our preamble discussion for ages. So I want to start you off on our set of questions that we have. So the first one is, what inspired you to become a behavior specialist after a hugely successful career working in education?
I think I'm always reluctant about being called a behavior specialist. I think I'm fascinated by behavior. I think it started very early on in my career when I was in the primary school. I really enjoyed working I enjoyed working with all children, but when you have those children who just don't seem to find themselves fitting in school life, I enjoyed working with them. Then was fortunate enough to go and work at Bernardo's residential special school, where we were working with children, and so many of them had 6 or 7 diagnoses attached to them, and you suddenly have to work in a very different way. You suddenly have to think very differently, and that was fundamentally, you're looking at the behaviors and you're trying to look through those behaviors and understand the emotion that is driving those behaviors, so that you can then help and support. And I think I just was fascinated and wanted to understand more and learn more, um, so that you could have an impact, so that you were having an impact yourself, but actually growing teams that were having an impact, because you were thinking differently about how you could work with these children and young people.
How does one do that, Jonathan? How does one um, ascertain the the causes behind a certain behavior when it comes to a young child misbehaving, or there could be a history of that, or there could just suddenly be a day when a child decides to not follow the school's behavior code. What does a teacher do when that happens?
I think it's trying to, and it's in a way it sounds really easy to talk about it, but it's actually so, for teachers around the world, the pressures on them, the lack of time they have to do these things. I'm fully aware of that, but it's that bit of trying to look at what's driving the behavior, what is the function of the behavior, what is it that the child is feeling, what do they need, what do they want. You mentioned it, some children just need a moment where they need some attention, some reassurance. We're all designed as human beings, we're designed for connection. Our brains are hardwired to desire that connection. You and I have never met before, but yet we have these introductions and we bounce around some pleasantries with each other, and that's all us learning how to connect with each other. And children are going into school every day, and those things are driving them. So we have to take a step back and say, in this moment, what is it that's going on? Because predominantly children don't go into school and go, I want to misbehave today. That is, they're not doing that. They're not doing that. They're just going, as you said, some children are going in with anxieties. They've built things up. They've potentially said, I'm not successful in this area, this subject, whatever it might be. That causes an anxiety. They might be bringing anxieties in from home, angst. They might be, so many different things that impact us as adults. And then you think of that for children who are trying to develop and learn what, at the very youngest ages, what does this, when I feel like this, what is this all about? What does it mean? And that's the bit that's really important for teachers to kind of guide children through those things. And one of the biggest things we teach about thinking skills, and one of the skills that's hugely important is listening. And really listening to children, letting them do letting them do the bit of just say exactly what's going on. Don't interrupt, just let it go out. Because I think, because we're so keen to care, we're quite often listen, but we're creating solutions in our head at the same time. And then we can fill all the things in for the child, and actually the child just wants to talk. They just want to let out what's going on. And it might be that they're in a situation where the teacher, the support staff, whoever that might be that they decide to talk to, is the only person that they get an opportunity to have listen to them. And that's a big moment for children.
And I found that that like you said, that well-being conversation, if a child's acting up, rather than challenge it, you are taught to challenge it, but I've often found that it's very useful to say, can you do me a favor and just, in trouble, just take a step outside. Let's have a conversation outside, private conversation outside the classroom while everyone works. And I found sometimes it's very useful to just take a step outside. What's going on? Are you okay? Is something bothering you? Rather than, have you noticed that you have misbehaved according to the behavior chart of 2.5 bullet point A, and because of that, your sanction is such and such? And the child might say, I actually just had a bit of a bad morning. And they say, look, you can do better than this.
I think it's that thing, isn't it, that and it, and it's just having that moment of self-awareness and being aware of what we're bringing into any situation. And quite often, the little role play you did there brilliantly is quite often when we are in that place where we come in with kind of power and discipline, and we say and we make big bold statements to children. That's a lot more about us than it is about them. And actually, don't we want to support them and find out what it is that is going on for them and understanding? And the only way you're going to get that is to take your first approach, which is, to go in and say, okay, come on, talk to me, tell me how can I help you? What is it you need right now? Because that's far healthier, and in that you get growth. Yeah, your other example is just firefighting all the time, and all you end up doing is you end up having a structure within your classroom, within your school, where you're just constantly putting out fires, and learning and growth isn't taking place in terms of children getting to a point where they're self-regulating their behavior.
And I think that I know that, as you and I both know, that a school curriculum is incredibly busy. There's a lot of pressure and timetabling is very limited as well. But I do think that schools would benefit from giving some time. It could be informed time. It could be a well-being session where children are equipped with the skills to reflect. Because if we equip them with the skills to reflect, then they'll reflect on their own behavior. And that will allow them. You give them those couple of minutes outside, and I don't walk out straight away. I'll give them a minute, and then I'll come out and say, "What do you think?" And that minute allows them to reflect and just to ponder about, I've been sent outside. How was I behaving? Rather than forcing a person to reflect, saying, "Did you not realize this?" Well, you haven't given me a moment to realize. You're just telling me what I should realize.
And I think potentially it's going to cover something you might ask me, but it's this idea of, for a long time we've referred to things as behavior management, and so we talk about managing behavior, but then the problem with that is that we are, as adults, managing. We're not allowing that growth, and the only way you allow growth is through, we talk about behavior supports, because it's about supporting and thinking about exactly what you've described. Is like, show me, what is it, I need to understand, how do I do this?
We could, like you said, behavior support. We could also rebrand it as behavior self-management.
Yeah, yeah. And that's ultimately what we do as educators, isn't it? Is support children and young people to get to the point where they can be functioning members of the society, and and the community they live in. They've got to understand what good behavior looks like. We can't just say we expect good behavior. You have to teach that. You have to role model that, so that children and young people are aware of what it is that they're aspiring to.
I agree. And like you said about when a teacher is being quite top heavy and saying, well, you haven't followed this code, and this is the sanction and so on. That's more about the teacher than it is about the young person.
Yeah, we have to be aware that, and I think it's a really important thing. I think we have to be aware of all the things that we bring in as adults into the workplace, and it's three different layers. You've got a very top superficial layer of the things that have happened, the journey into school. You might not have, you might have spilt some coffee. You might have, know that you've got a meeting with the head teacher that day, and those things all impact on you. But your second layer is, you might be bringing in things where, you're having issues with your partner, you've got things going on with your own children, you might have had a bereavement in the family. All those things you bring in as well. And then deeper than that, the things that you carry from your own upbringing, and the things that you've been brought up with and experiences you've had, will impact on you. And we as the adults take those in, and they're in us. No. Well, I think that the reality is you have to be aware that they're in you because you can't get rid of them. You can't, cancel them out. They're there. So I just have to, we talk about this idea of so that, if something's happening and a young person in front of us is, there's they're becoming distressed and we need to think about how we support them. The first thing we need to think about is, how am I feeling? Because if I've got all those things and I'm feeling agitated myself, then that will impact the response I give.
I think that's a real talking point. Actually, teachers, we do consider the academic specialism that academic knowledge that we bring into our lessons, but we don't really think, well, what's as a teacher who's also a human being. We also have a history, and we have to be mindful of that.
Absolutely, because I think, as much as we've talked about children and young people's emotions, you know, as adults, we have all those things going on for us as well. We have all those emotions, and we all know we're sitting here. You and I know that teaching is an incredibly demanding job. Yeah, it's a joyous job, and I absolutely loved being a teacher. It was a joy, but it is demanding. And there's, I think around the world there's a lot of pressure on teachers all the time. And one of the biggest pressures is, you know, you've got to know the children, you've got to know where they're at, you've got to be able to support them in achieving academically. That's the structure of education is fundamentally around that. But at the same time, I think educators are fully aware that they have a responsibility around the kind of upbringing of a child as well, in terms of supporting them with their character development and how they get to that point of good behavior, as we've talked about.
And I think that if one of my students leaves school with a fantastic set of grades, but they are unable to, because they haven't been taught, they're unable to manage their emotions, okay, and manage their own behavior, then I will have failed them, because if they go into the world of work, have a tantrum, or if they go into the world of work and something upsets them and they fly off the handle, that's on me as their educator, because I didn't, as their educator, help them, equip them with the tools to be able to manage their emotions, so that when those circumstances and situations do arise, they're able to compose themselves and manage the plethora of emotions that they will feel. I think I would rather my student gets an okay, let's say a grade 7 or a grade 6, but they're able to manage their emotions successfully because I invested that time in them as an educator to help, like you say, support their behavior rather than just manage their behavior.
Yeah, and I think we're going back to that point we were making earlier about the world that we live in now, and I think we are in certain societies we see an increase in mental health issues and the level of anxiety that children and young people are feeling, and some of that is around the kind of levels of confidence and resilience and support they've been given, and it's not the failing of individual educators, and it's not the failing of of schools. I think we have to, and this is a big thing to be talking about, but we have to look at the structures that we have in place and say, what things do we need to focus on, and what things, you've just described, Sam, what things do we need to focus on, so it's not purely one stream. It's not just the academic, it's the rounded view of a child, and it's, the whole child that we need to be thinking of.
Because there was that thing, wasn't there? I mean, in the past, I remember if someone didn't hold the door for someone, you say, "Where did he go to school?" Someone would be like, "I go to school there." Well, didn't they teach you to hold the door for someone? Because historically, you'd expect a person who leaves. I remember I wrote an article once. It was, "What is the point of education?" And I concluded that it was to, like you say, to educate the person fully, so that they're fully rounded person going into the world, not just academically strong, but also strong in terms of the morals, their ethics, their ability to problem solve real world issues. And I think I still hold that belief, actually.
Yeah, I think, we could talk a lot about this, philosophically, where are we in terms of education and what is the purpose of it? I think is, a fascinating topic, but we must include in that this idea that we need to recognize that we have a tremendous opportunity as adults to support children around behaviour. We talk about something we call the cycle of influence. So if you think that we are all of us, but for children, that it's built on the fact that they have experiences, and those experiences prompt feelings and emotions, and those feelings and emotions prompt behaviours, and those behaviours prompt responses. And those responses are usually from adults, but they may be from other children. And it's those responses that then form experiences. And you can see then, what I'm describing becomes a cycle. And what we have as an opportunity as adults is to affect how children are going to feel by changing their experiences, because we respond in a different way. So you go back to your example of, sitting with a child and telling them, power and discipline, telling them off for something they've done wrong, and you don't listen to them, you don't give them any time, don't give them any understanding. So their experience is that. So every time an adult is going to challenge them, your words, then they are ready with certain emotions sitting there. So their behavioural response is based on those emotions. Change the response to them, and we change the experiences, and that whole cycle can be changed, not in one go, but consistently being different with them and thinking differently about how you respond to them will change behaviours.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, going back to that conversation with the child then, and you've spoken before about having a puzzle solving approach to understanding behavior. What does this mean? Can you unpack that for me? What does puzzle solving approach mean? And how can you create this approach within education?
I think it's quite simple in some ways. So I talk about, just choose the name Bob. So I'm working with a child, Bob, and it's just thinking about, what do I know about Bob from yesterday that helps me work with Bob today, that helps me plan and support Bob tomorrow. So it's that constant thinking around, what do I see in the behaviors and the things that were happening yesterday that allows me to interact with Bob in the right way today, to support him in the right way. So to have an awareness of things like we talked about earlier, there might be something. So yesterday I discovered that there's things going on, and Bob is going home to a situation he's anxious about. So when he comes in today, I know that that's happened last night. So what do I do, and what the things that I'm aware of today? And knowing that that might happen again, how do I plan to work with Bob tomorrow? If I'm aware that he has something that happens on every Wednesday evening, what do I put in play to support him on a Wednesday every week, and then support him on a Thursday after that's happened? And so it's just trying to think that way, and picking up all these things that are going on for children, and collaborating together as a staff team to look at and complete the whole picture of a child. So there might be things when I'm working with Bob that I see, but you might see other things as well. And if we spend time and get moments together to say, what did you see? What were the things that you picked up on? Did you notice this? Then we get a fuller picture of what's going on for Bob, and get a greater understanding of how we can support him. I mean, I was very fortunate in the 17 years I worked at Bernardo's. I worked with fantastic people, a fantastic team of people who all thought that way. We were always looking at what's the whole picture that we need to be aware of, so that we can best support the individual.
It makes a difference, doesn't it? I mean, we always, as teachers, we say to the young people, can you discuss this question in pairs? But as educators, we often work in silos. Well, this is my subject, that's your subject. But sometimes, like you say, creating that time to get teachers talking, to allow both people, or, well, if it's a group of teachers, then the entire group, to get a full picture of the child, that can be incredibly beneficial, rather than just you have one piece of that puzzle, but you're missing that important part that the other teacher has. And you won't get that without communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we do our training sessions, one of the things we do is get people, in their teams to focus around a particular individual. And every single time, without fail, every single time people say, it was such valuable time. Everything, the rest of the training, brilliant, but it was also just having that time together to reflect on an individual child, because it's, teachers are time poor, because there's so much they're expected to do in any one day, and so I know that it's difficult to find the time, but it makes such a difference to those individual children. But also when you're working with your class, it will make a massive difference every day to have that understanding, to have thought that way, to have had those conversations with colleagues.
That's right. Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I want to now ask you to unpick that phrase we were talking about earlier. So at Team Teach, you have made a shift from the term behavior management to instead talking about behavior support. And I was also, considering the phrase of behavior self-management. When it comes to the phrase of behavior support, why do you think it's important that we go from behavior management to behavior support? Can you unpick that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's some of the things that I was talking about earlier. This idea that we're that historically, this idea of managing is adults doing to the child. So you're managing for the child, but yeah, and you can't be in a space of constant management because there's no learning going on for the child. They're just, you know, yeah, they're being managed. They're not becoming, yeah, not becoming independent. They're just waiting for that management all the time. Whereas what we actually want, and what is the healthiest thing, is for a child to navigate themselves, to learn, to be in a structure where, we talked about at my school, we talked about it being a rubber band school, that you have clear boundaries. Everybody knows. So if you think of a giant rubber band around everybody, everybody knows where the boundaries are, but you need to create flex in those boundaries. Not saying you accept, things where children and young people aren't doing the right thing. You don't accept them, but you have an awareness of them, and there has to be that level of flex. Well, yeah, yeah. So I think about and she won't thank me for doing this, but I think about my youngest daughter, who is one of the funniest people I know. But she had to learn, she had to go through that whole experience growing up about, you know, that's funny, and that actually, oh, that's a bit on the edge, and that's a little bit rude. So you're she was constantly working that out. Oh, I got that wrong. That didn't work. I shouldn't do that. And that's what it's like for children all the time. That's the world and how they kind of experience it and navigate it emotionally. That's what we're doing. We're testing things out all the time. So if you're going to do that, if so, take the example of my daughter. If you just come in and say no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't. That's rude. Shouldn't do ever say things like that at all. Then you cut it out completely. And so they don't ever grow to understand the difference between something being funny and something being rude.
There's no autonomy in terms of um, behavior management. It's all passive. You're told how to behave, and they'll think your daughter will think, "Well, I shouldn't do this because I was told not to," rather than I shouldn't do this because it's going to offend a person in this way. And I've come to that realization myself.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that we want when young people are then going into the workplace and they're in society, they're in communities. You want them to be able to kind of assess different situations they're in and behave accordingly in those situations. So it's, how do you treat people that you're working with? How do you engage with them? How do you communicate with them? How do you do that when you're communicating with peers? How do you communicate when you're, talking to your boss? There's all sorts of different things that you have to navigate as an adult. And where do you learn that? You learn that as a child within school. And that's really important. You learn it at home as well, but you are learning it fundamentally through those interactions at school, how you interact with your peers in the classroom, how you interact with teachers, how, if you're going to you end up talking to the head teacher. How do you engage with the head teacher with a level of confidence, a level of respect, all those things? And you have to learn those things, and you're only going to learn them if you're supported through the journey. You're not going to learn them if it's constantly managed for you.
Yeah. Um, Thank you, Jonathan. I wanted to ask you now, what would you say are the most, and this is probably my most loaded question, okay? Now, when I worked in London, I'm in Qatar now, it's quite fortunate. Behavior is nothing like it was in London. I mean, London can be very, very challenging. And I would imagine as a behavior expert that's gone around the world, I know you don't like the phrase, but as someone who's interacted with teachers all around the world, you've probably heard and seen it all. Um, what would you say are the most effective strategies for supporting bad behavior in schools?
So I think the most effective strategies are those thinking skills we talked about earlier, thinking about what I bring to any situation, so that I'm the barometer in the room. I walk in and I have an impact, and I want my impact to be positive. I want it to be supportive. I think the idea that we bring consistency in. I think children are really good at looking for uh, kind of fairness and justice. And so for us to be consistent with everybody, but also to communicate a level of understanding around that we have an awareness of what's going on with each individual child. We're aware of things, and we are confident in how we're working with those children. That gives off a lot. Having a confidence that when you ask for things, those children you're working with are going to respond positively. I think if you ask in a confident way, that makes a huge difference. If you're always asking people and you do it in a way where you don't expect them to ever do it, then they'll just meet that expectation. Um, as I said earlier, I think listening is hugely important. It's something that lots of children miss out on. They don't have that, um, and I don't believe in this. I think it's a very old-fashioned concept to talk about um, going in and being incredibly hard and unpopular when you first meet a group of children, and then you ease up in time. I don't smile until I would say I didn't know if you yeah, exactly. Don't smile until Christmas. And I just think all that creates is by the time you get to Christmas, your class don't like you as a teacher. And you're not going to recover that by suddenly coming back after Christmas. Yeah, you're not it's not what children need. Children need to feel that they're heard. They need to feel that they're living in an environment that's fair and consistent, and that they have a voice within it, and they are going to be supported at times where they're not sure what's going on for them emotionally, that there is someone there to support them.
Yeah, and like you say, I agree that yes, young people need boundaries, and they need to, those boundaries need to remain the same with some level of flexibility. You know, everyone has an off day, for example, when a young person might, and you have to allow for that flexibility. Not don't let the structures fail the young people because they can. If they're too rigid, they will fail the young people. But I think it's very important to, like you said, be approachable. If you're going to be top down and top heavy, then teaching right now isn't the place for you because you're going to create an impression among the young person that you're very hard, very stern, and that you've lost them. If you lose them in that first term, it's very hard to win them over in the second term.
Yeah, and I think it's they need to, at whatever age children are at, they need to feel that you're there for them.
There has to be. Teaching is very altruistic as a profession. It is very selfless as a profession, and you have to approach it with that mindset. The what you get out of it is the progress the young people make. They're not going to thank you for it.
Yeah,
You'll on Teacher Day, you'll get a thank you card.
yeah.
You might get. I've got a cupboard of coffee cups right on World Teachers Day, but but that's it. And you have to be there with if you're there for something back, you're in the wrong profession.
I think that the thing is when you're working with children, and probably quite a big statement to make is that, I think part of our role is to be an emotionally available adult, and by that I mean we have to have a level of emotional awareness to understand, what a child might be going through. One of the things that we do is we talk about that potentially, children in your class are fizzy bottles of drink, and they've got stuff bubbling on that you can't see from things at home. We also talk about they might be flat because they're struggling with their emotions and not sure how to respond to things, and that's the responsibility we also have when they're in our classroom.
That's right. That's right. And like you say, part of that is part of the that involves what that involves is knowing ourselves as adults,
Yeah,
and
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
being able to manage our emotions before we can help someone else, a young person, volatile, emotional, and going through adolescence, manage their own. If we can't manage our own, there's no way that we're going to be able to help a young person self-manage, and that's the key word there as well too.
Yeah, and I think again, you're probably you're probably going to ask me questions later on, and I'll have already talked about some of these. But I think we have a tremendous responsibility and opportunity at the same time when we get to role model uh, the expectations we have around good behaviour. What does that look like for a child? Well, where are they going to see it most? They're going to see it most from us, and so I think we've got to think that way too. We can't have expectations of them if they're not things that we're demonstrating on a daily basis in our classroom.
He won't thank me for this, but there's one of my old head teachers. His name was Ibrahim Lawson. He's a former Ofsted inspector, and he filled in for one of my head teachers that went on a short vacation, and I spent time with him actually, and he said, we were working in a school in East London, which the behaviour can be quite challenging, and he was talking to us, and he said once he was working in a school, and a child had misbehaved. So the teacher, and he was the head teacher. So the teacher then marched that boy down to the headmaster's office and said, "This boy has done such and such." And he said, "All right." He goes, and the teacher was like, "So, you know, how are we going to apply the behaviour policy?" And he said, "Look," he said to the boy, "what you done was wrong. You understand?" And he goes, "Yes, I understand." He goes, "Right, you're not going to do that again, are you? Because it's wrong." The kid goes, "Yes, sir." But the teacher wasn't happy because his ego he'd gone into a situation with his ego where he felt that he'd been challenged by a young person and he wanted the full extent of the behavior policy to be applied.
But it's also I completely understand the levels of frustration that some teachers have because and some of that frustration is, I want to take the class, I want to take these individuals on a journey academically, and I want to be able to take them through, whatever the subject is, and I want them to achieve, and I want them to get to the end of year, whether it's exams or whatever it might be. And when someone isn't doing something in your classroom and is behaving in a way where it disrupts that, I understand how teachers can feel just so frustrated because I want more for you than you're going to be able to achieve. Yeah, yeah, they get, and so and that's why I really believe in the training we do has a huge impact because we're giving people those thinking skills where they're able to go, yeah, okay, I see where this is, and I see these behaviors. Let me look at them because the more I support, the more chance there is we move on from where they are right now.
Thank you, Jonathan. Okay, my next question was, so you talked about working in a primary school. I myself work in a secondary school, and I always have. How can you adapt behavior support strategies for different age groups from primary to secondary schools students?
I think I think there's two sides to this. I think a lot of behaviours you see are very similar. I think they make the functions of the behaviour may be very similar, but there are different ways to approach it, and I don't think it's necessarily just categorizing it around kind of the stage you're at, whether it's primary or secondary. I think we always talk about the need to really look at uh, the needs of the individual and where the individual finds themselves, but also looking at cohorts and the behavior trends within cohorts and how you best support those. I think there's naturally a level of expectation that the understanding and application of good behavior in secondary school should be advanced from where it is in primary school because they should have learnt particular parameters to exist within. But that's not always the case. And it's always then that can be about development and equally can be about the circumstances that individual children find themselves at due to the things going on in their life, home, the things that they may have experienced. We just we don't have a full level of understanding around the amount of adverse childhood experiences that people go through, the trauma that people go through, and the deep impact of that, and how we support that is not based on what stage you're at. It's based on when it's happening to you and how we can best support at that time.
Thank you, Jonathan. I want to now move you on to something else, which is, in your experience, what are some of the common challenges that educators face when trying to promote behaviors that they want to see, and what can they do to address them? So, we all know how we want our young people to behave, but what are the challenges that teachers face when trying to promote those behaviors in class?
I think one of the, and it's not uncommon around the globe, but in some places it's different, but certainly think there's a role to play in a collaborative approach between home and school. I think if you can crack that and have that level of support from parents and carers, that means that you are journeying together with children, and the expectations that you have around behavior, the understanding you have around what's going on for the individual child, that that is the most powerful thing for a child, is that if teachers and parents are working together. And I think that's sometimes one of the biggest challenges is when those things aren't happening. So when it feels like sometimes that school is going one way and home is going the other way, uh, and if that is the case, that becomes very demanding on teachers to try and set the kind of parameters that they, in terms of expectations, if that isn't supported at home, and vice versa. Frustration if, as a parent, you think it's one thing and that's not then being seen at school. I think we've got to get to a place where it's a collaborative approach, that teachers are happy and comfortable support engaging with parents, and parents particularly are happy and confident engaging with school.
I think it's very important that, yeah, like you say, teachers and parents shouldn't only meet on Parents' Day and then that's it. There should be a constant, ongoing communication. And if we think of it, the school and the parents around the school. I know in the UK you have a phrase called the catchment area, but in the Middle East it's not quite the same. But all the parents that have children at the school are part of a community. If we think of that idea of community, the school I went to is actually called North Westminster Community School, and I think that word community really stuck with me because of that. Because the headmaster, he always told us that we were all part of like a family, as it were, and you would never neglect a family member and just say, oh, I'm not going to talk to that person until next month. you know I think that's helpful because that can help to create, not to create, but to maintain an ongoing dialogue, which is healthy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I want to now ask you about, actually, before I ask my next question, having trained teachers all over the world, I wanted to ask you, was there anything unique in a certain part of the world that you saw? Was it where some places in the world honor is very important, for example, other places it might be something very different? Was there anything particular that you saw in a certain part of the world?
Um, no, I think every part of the world there are elements where culturally there are different things, like you described. In certain cultures, honor is a really important thing, and doing things that honor the family, and so you have a responsibility to do that. I think that's hugely powerful and can be a massive positive for children and young people. But also, there are times where, for some children and young people, that can also be um, something that is overwhelming for them. So that's very interesting, and I think you see that in different parts of the world. I think there are other parts of the world where um, kind of the expectations of and levels of aspiration are really really low through generations, and cultural circumstance completely understandable, and that has an impact on children, and how you educate those children, where I think about in some places where it's really tough, where there's levels of unemployment, and there have been for so many years, generation upon generation. How do you grow aspirations in young people if they don't see it in their community, and that equally is a challenge. But in terms of in terms of behaviors, I think it's all about looking at individuals and how they're trying to navigate the world they're in. That's the most interesting thing.
I agree. I was talking with this another guest of mine about how Hollywood, a coach actually, how one of the things that Hollywood gets right is whenever they make a teaching film, whether it's Dangerous Minds, whether it's Coach Carter, whether it's Freedom Writers, they always make the teacher inspiring, and growing up watching those films, I thought I want to do that. That looks like such a rewarding job. Whereas I could go work in accounting. Actually, I can't. I'm terrible at numbers. I could go work in law and make a truckload of money, but it won't be fulfilling like that. You're not going to be inspiring people. And I think Hollywood's there to make movies. I appreciate that, but they always shine a spotlight on those teachers, such as Miss G, such as who's a real person, but Coach Carter wasn't real. Samuel L. Jackson, but it's shining a light on an inspiring individual. And I think that's one takeaway from that is our role, to constantly inspire the young people, to give them, we are the role model. You can't be an authoritarian teacher that tells kids off, but you got a picture of Steve Jobs on the wall. Oh yeah, you should aspire to be like that. No, they don't know Steve Jobs. They know you. You are the adult in front of them. You have to be the one to inspire them.
Yeah, and I think that is, for the majority of teachers and educators around the world, that's what motivates you to be in the classroom, is that you are there to inspire your class. I mean, that was the joy for me, was doing that, and I agree with you in terms of Hollywood. I would throw in, Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, the fact that he was prepared to do the different things in order to get the most for those that he was teaching. And I think that's the great thing, is that there are millions of teachers around the world who are doing that, who see that as their vocation in life, who are, committed to making a difference in that way. And I think that's why we do what we do in terms of supporting teachers and teaching assistants around the world, is how do we, allow you to have the biggest impact you can have? How can our training support you in your thinking so that you can be that individual that makes life-changing differences for children and young people?
And when you do play that role in their lives, they'll reach out to you and they'll come back and again and show you, this is what I've done. Look how the journey that that you put me on. This is where I am now. And rather than that teacher,
I think just personally, and I don't mean this to sound like, oh, look at me, but I just really brilliant for me recently. My youngest daughter is a mental health practitioner in schools, and she was working with a mum, and they finished the session, and the mum said, can I just ask you, is your dad Jonathan Newport? And she said, yeah. And she said, yeah, your dad taught me when I was at primary school. And she said, your dad needs to know, like, so many of the class that we were in, her sister had become a teacher because, you'd done something in the classroom that just made them go, this is something I want to do. And I'm not saying all, but I think that's the experience for so many teachers who, give everything of themselves in teaching every day, that it inspires the next generation. That's what we need to be aware of as well. And not necessarily to go into teaching, but to view the world with compassion, excitement, challenge, everything, that all stems from teachers doing the phenomenal job that they do.
Yeah, I mean, on a personal note, I had a student that she was a Qatari, actually. She's here in Qatar, and I always, I just blanket statement. I always say, try to achieve anything you can. Don't let your don't allow anything to hinder your dreams. And so I taught her English language and lit GCSE, and then AS English. And during her AS, she was applying to university. I said, what are you applying for? And she said, I'm applying to do engineering. I said, wow, that's really ambitious. She said, yeah, sir. I said, what made you want to do that? She goes, look, all of my other friends are telling me, why, you're a girl. Why do you want to do engineering for? And she said, I'm going to tell you, sir, what I told them. I would be applying to engineering, whether I was a boy or a girl. So just being a girl shouldn't allow me to, shouldn't prevent me to apply for a male dominated profession. She did it. She couldn't find any engineering places here because it's not really a specialism here. So she went out to the UK, went out, did her engineering degree, came back. She's now an engineer for Qatar Airways, and she's building. If ever you're on a plane, you can be like, oh, I think I did a podcast with a teacher, one of whose students built this engine. She builds the turbine engines, and that's so inspiring. And when she finished her degree, she emailed me and said, "Sir, I finished my engineering degree. I've now got a job at Qatar Airways, but I'm not done yet. I'm applying for a master's. So can you help write me a letter of recommendation?" Did that. She went and did her master's, and 2 years later, she said, "This year, so I'm applying for a PhD in engineering. Will you write me?" I said, "Of course I will." And and she said, "Sir, you motivated me back then. So not only am I teaching, but I'm also a football coach. And the coach approach that you took towards all of us, I'm now taking towards little girls playing football." So it can have such a lasting impact.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if we had, lots more teachers sitting on this with us now and talking with us now, they'd all have those stories. They'd all have stories of, previous students who have got in contact with them, and that because that's the role that teaching takes, and that's why we need to equip teachers in the fullest way we possibly can to have that biggest impact with children and young people.
Because misbehavior, I remember I was doing many years ago, I always consider misbehavior as just someone who got it wrong. And as teachers, we wouldn't want, if we were late one day, let's say we couldn't get the train on time, we wouldn't want our head teacher, our employer, to come down on us like a ton of bricks, and shout at us. We would want a conversation. Look, I got it wrong today, and so on. So why would we not apply that same approach to our own classrooms? Well, they're in a sense they're our employees because they're there to work with us towards fulfilling their potential.
I go back to the thing which is, that we talked about earlier. It's every child is trying to navigate life. They're trying to navigate the world that they find themselves in with the set of circumstances that they have, the the home life that they might have, the things that have impacted on them emotionally and physically, and they're navigating. And we need to always take that view. And it's a great example to say, if you're late for work, you want your boss to go, "Is everything okay? Are you all right?" And we should reflect that same, trait when we are working with children and young people.
Yeah, I completely agree. My next question, Jonathan, was how does understanding individual differences play a role in developing effective behavior support strategies? So when it comes to the young people in front of us, how important, and you talked about getting that picture of the whole child. Why is that so important? Can we not have blanket strategies that we put into writing, stick up on our walls and say, there is the behavior code and that's it?
I think you can definitely have generalized expectations, but you have to work into the way you're going to work with children this idea that everybody is completely unique and you have a unique set of circumstances that every child has lived through in terms of their upbringing, in terms of nurture, in terms of experiences. I go back to that cycle of influence that we've all had, experiences that cause these emotions, which cause our behavior, which then prompts these responses. And it's that ongoing cycle. And everybody's cycle is different. And everybody has different things. It's why I think the advances we've made in neuroscience and the understanding of the brain and how we function as human beings, and there's some great work about like understanding connection and the things that we look for. Every child is different that's walking into your classroom, and if you just adopt a blanket approach to them, then so many children are going to miss out on the experience of you as a teacher, and ultimately are going to miss out on the experience of education that they deserve, because you will have not met their needs because you just adopted a blanket approach. That a child with autism who has particular things that you need to be aware of and support them with, and that can be children who are impacted so much by sensory needs. How do you support them? How do you have an awareness of them, where they are in the classroom? All those things are very individualized. You can't just take a blanket approach to that.
I completely agree, Jonathan. Thank you. My next question is: can you discuss the importance of collaboration between educators? We talked about teachers not working as silos. Why is collaboration so important? Not only between teachers, but also between teachers and parents. And I know you touched upon this. Why is it so important when supporting children with helping them to manage their own behaviors and emotions?
I think I think to fully see a picture of the whole child, you need every lens. You need everybody's viewpoint on it. We talked about it earlier, didn't we, about parents. You need to understand a parent's perspective. You need to understand their expectations. You need to understand what they see. If a parent tells you that every Wednesday evening Bob is struggling to sleep and struggling to settle at night, whatever age Bob might be, there's an indicator that something is going on. Either something has happened during Wednesday that's caused that, or there is something coming up more likely on Thursday that causes Bob a level of anxiety that his sleep is disrupted. So you've then got two things. What is it on Thursday that we need to try and unpick and solve that is causing that level of anxiety? But also being aware that when Bob comes into school on a Thursday, if he's not slept well, that will impact him as well. Not having had a good night's sleep will impact him. We all know as adults what we're like if we've not slept well, and it's those things that we need to have an awareness of, and you're only going to be aware of it if you collaborate with home. But it's also the member of staff that is able to tell you that when they're on playground duty, for example, in the morning on a Thursday, you know Bob's always running in, and there's always something that means that Bob's late, and he always says, "Well, I haven't had a chance to have breakfast this morning," and it's always on a Thursday, and that impacts him because I'm a big believer in people being hangry when they, when they're hungry, that causes a level of frustration. So that's going to impact on them, and you only see that by talking and collaborating with each other. Because if you just see just see your window with that child, that lens that you have with them in that moment, then you're not getting the whole picture, and you're not really getting the opportunity to fully support them in the way that you can.
And I know that schools are incredibly busy, but I think time should be allocated to allowing teachers to talk among themselves and communicate about individual children, as well as creating opportunities for ongoing dialogue between home and school.
That's a structural shift. I think every teacher and teaching assistant we work with says, "Yeah, please, I'd love more time to be able to do this." Nobody that we work with says, "I don't agree with this, and I don't agree with that. This is a way to work and to best support children." We don't have that, but the problem is a lot around the structure of education, of school systems, that just doesn't give them time to do it.
I agree. Thank you, Jonathan. My next question is: what role do you see technology playing in behavior support and education in the future? I'm a big tech fan when it comes to supporting education. I'm not a fan of social media. The irony being that this will be on social media, but I'm not a fan of how a young person right now will tell you, quite frankly, I can't live without my phone. So how this is the thing that we cannot take away. So how can technology be used to support um, behavior support in education in the future?
Oh, that's a huge question. Um, I think we always have to be cautious around technology, but also embrace the fact that technology can create amazing things that can make a massive difference. I think there's some technology and it's already out there, but it's refining and emerging all the time around how you support individual children with things on devices that prompt them so that they can have like a traffic light system. So if they've got a level of anxiety, say they're in a particular lesson, or one that we worked on was around, they're learning independence and they're waiting for a bus and the bus is late, uh, and so that causes an anxiety, and they press the amber button on a traffic light system, and then that prompts them with things that they can do to support self-regulation. So just they can read things, and I love the idea of technology supporting in the moment in that way. But I also think there's a really influential thing, that technology will at some point support a finer um, degree of the ability to look at trends around behavior for individuals, and so that we can see more patterns of behavior and then understand the functions of behavior and then better support. So I think technology emerging in that way, the potential of AI to support in that is really, really interesting. Um, but again, I'm a big advocate, for the fact that you cannot take the human interaction out of it. When we're talking about behavior, the biggest bit in this is human interaction.
Now more than ever. I mean, there's talk in London, I think, and the UK of AI replacing teaching. I think no, it's not going to happen, because now more than ever, young people need adults in front of them. They don't need an adult on the phone, promoting merchandise and promoting brands and this sort of thing. They need someone, a guide by the side, as it were. But a face, Leo Thompson would say, a guide by the side. So a guide by the side to help them, like you say, navigate life. But a face-to-face guide by the side, not someone that's, you know,
But I think your point earlier about, and it's not just children and young people, know lots of adults who talk about, I can't live without my phone. And there's so many platforms now where the interaction is not in real time, it's not face to face. And so the ability to learn the nuances of social communication, to be able to read facial expressions and body language and adapt what we do and what we say, and teaching is has a big role in that. Understanding social communication, where do we see that the most? We see it in school. And so, I agree with you. We cannot lose that teacher in real time being there with a class.
and I've got one more question, which is my final question. What advice would you give to educators who are striving to create a positive and inclusive learning environment for all students? This would be like a takeaway bit of bullet point bits of advice.
Keep being creative, keep trying. I tell a story about I worked with a young man who I noticed when he became anxious and frustrated, he used to furrow his brow, and I could see it. And I talked to him, and I said, I can see this in you. Can you feel it? And he said, yeah, I can feel it. And I said to him, so what would help you in that moment when you're, you can feel that's building up? What could you do? And he thought about it for ages, and 10 years old, and he said, I love when you peel an orange, the smell of an orange. He said, just that kind of. He said that I don't think about anything else when I'm doing that. And so I was like, okay. And so put some oranges in the drawer of my desk, and I thought I'd cracked it. I thought I'd cracked, behavior in a moment. Like, here I am, and it worked. And his brow furrowed, and I was able just to pop an orange on his desk, and that worked. And it worked so well, and it changed his life for 3 days, for 3 days, and then it stopped working. But then I had to think of something else, and then we had to keep going. And that would be the thing that I would say to educators is, it's that brilliant thing that I think people set their minds to, is never to lose sight of, keep trying different things, keep being creative around behavior, keep being creative with the things that you try, the levels that you'll go to make it, that you bring the best supports to the children you're working with.